The Epstein files are going to be released Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So, the Epstein files are going to be released in Congress. There was only one representative who voted no. So, it's moved from almost everybody saying release them, but Trump and his most ardent supporters, notably not Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is now going to be out at the beginning of next year, but a lot of diehard Trump supporters probably going along with him saying it's a conspiracy, it's a hoax. But then, at least this is my take on it, then came the 2025 election day. Trump saw that things weren't going his way. I think he does have some political instincts. And one of the political instincts is probably might as well do what everybody already thinks, and indeed it was as close to unanimous as you can get without actually being unanimous in the House. What I also noticed about this is that there are certain things that they might not release in the Epstein files. So, just cutting to the quick, what are signs that we might see that important stuff is being withheld, thus it's not all really released?
The most telling sign is the investigations loophole. So there's a provision, my understanding, that they can't release any files that are involved in an active investigation. And so when they announce, I don't know, a few days before the vote that, oh, there's going to be an investigation into just the Democrats who knew Epstein or interacted with Epstein, that tells me that they're looking for loopholes, right? They're looking for ways to try and find a rock that they can put all the really thorny files under and just say, oh, we're investigating. Because there's no real timeline on how long an investigation can go, right? They can say they're investigating for the next 3.5 years or whatever. The only requirement, as far as I understand, within the bill that was passed is that if they choose not to release any files, they have to go to Congress and explain why, if something's redacted or not released. And that's not that difficult. The explanation's pretty simple. The federal government, one job that they do is investigate things, since they're also law enforcement is something that a lot of different agencies do, and they all have different ways that they investigate things. And so there's a whole number of angles that they can approach this where they say, oh, we're doing an active investigation for the money. We're doing an active investigation for all the Democrats and everyone in their periphery, which means anybody who met the Democrats. And oh, it looks certain named individuals just so happen to be named a lot in the files, but they also met a lot of the Democrats and appear at the same time as the Democrats. Guess they're not going to show up in the files. And they can do that because there's no real limit on what they can investigate. It's a magic wand, right? They could just wave the magic wand and say, we're just investigating. The one exception there is that Congress does have some teeth in the bill, that it's an actual law instead of just a resolution. It's not them saying, oh, this would be nice. We sure will these files released. No, they have a timetable, they have deadlines, and there's fines and sanctions in there for anything that they don't have a reason provided for. And so that's going to be complicated and interesting. The only other thing I thought of that could occur is if Trump, because he's a classifying authority, decides to just classify the files. They have any kind of a national security element to them. If there's any kind of espionage going on, if there's any kind of money changing hands for intelligence reasons, right? Because we don't know. That's the whole thing here for this saga, is that because this went on for, we're talking years and years, decades, right? Going back into the 90s is when they first started, maybe in the 80s. I'm not entirely sure what these files refer to in terms of the investigations, but the stories go back a long time. And if you listen to the victims, some of the victims are from a very long time ago. And so that spans a really long period of time. And when something spans a really long period of time, was someone who happened to be very rich and who happened to be very well connected across governments, countries, was talking to leaders from all sorts of different parts of the world. There's an intelligence aspect to that. The question then becomes, will any of the files be classified? And if any of those files are classified, how much of the files are classified? And we're not going to know, right? Because due to the fact that they're classified, all we're going to see is classified, right? Those are the two avenues I can see, at least immediately, for how, if these files are going to be suppressed, that's how they would be suppressed still, right? That there are indeed loopholes and exceptions created. And this bill that was passed isn't absolute. It's not release all the files, period. There are indeed exceptions, and they have 30 days to provide it. It's not going to be an immediate thing. They have time to sort through them, figure out what's classified, and figure out what applies to an active investigation. It begs the question on the active investigation part, why was that happening since the agreement that was made when he was put in prison on new charges and was in custody? Why hasn't that investigation been ongoing since then? Just because he didn't end up getting the life sentence or whatever, like getting the full trial and the convictions and all that with all the evidence because he died in prison. Yeah, they went after Ghislaine Maxwell, right? And they charged her and convicted her and put her in prison. What about all these other people that are supposedly involved? Were those investigations not ongoing? And if they were ongoing, what gives that they're doing it again now? It just seems odd, right? The timing of announcing the investigation seemed very odd in the sense that it was a few days before this vote was going to happen. And yeah, I think that there's going to be at least some kind of effort made to hide at least some of the files. How much, who knows, but certainly the tools are there and the ingredients are there to make it happen. And the incentive appears to be there, right? There's apparently something in these files that just they don't want to see the light of day. Period. If there's a way to make it not show up, I I don't see a reason why they wouldn't try. It's not like this administration has hesitated at going forward with things. They fired thousands of people. They tried to cut, like, at one point they tried to cut all federal grants and loans. That didn't happen as they announced, but they tried it, right? At one point they just tried to turn off all the money, all outlays in the entire government, everything, right? And whoa, what about these projects that have been going on for 50 years, 70 years, however long, like highways and national park? There's a whole bunch of things that are like ongoing projects that you can't just cut the money to because they've been going for so long. You don't want to have a giant stretch of highway just not fixed or not built or not repaired.
It doesn't seem to particularly add up in terms of the brashness with which certain actions are taken. I did find myself putting different lenses on and saying to myself, maybe there are active investigations, and they did need some time to vacuum that up before releasing a lot of it. Maybe a lot of this bluster was a cover so that could continue, and if so, great. And with that, we won't know until, like, much later. But perhaps a decade or so from now, okay, then that person got charged, then that person got charged, then that person got charged. So, if we are to be hopeful about it, perhaps it's that. Related to this, did you see how Lawrence Summers is stepping back from public commitments? He's still going to teach classes, but he's taken himself out of the spotlight. Mike nodded. No, but he isn't really accused of, dubious, nefarious conduct.
Some of those emails, he was asking for advice from Epstein about relationships that...
Oh, relationship advice. Okay.
It didn't paint him in a good light, let's put it that way.
I understand.
Okay.
No, so it's some of the emails that were released by the Oversight Committee. Look, nobody in a position of power or authority or at that level of, what's the word, like cultural or social elevation leaves from a board or backs away from public commitments if there's not a there. And in this case, there was a kind of there, right? It wasn't necessarily like a criminal there, but it certainly was a sort of sordid, how do you say, like soap opera drama kind of thing of the if it was true what was being discussed in the emails, then it paints a not so pretty picture of Summers engaging in perhaps less than honorable tactics for trying to have romantic conquests. I'm trying to phrase this.
I think people can take the implications.
I haven't read the emails specifically, but I've listened to descriptions of what the emails were about, and the descriptions were not great. Put it that way. Look, to the extent that I've heard about this, I heard about, I think Elizabeth Warren was publicly commenting about how Summers needs to back down from some of these public commitments and positions of power, influence. But also, the proof is simply in the fact that he did back down, right? And did apologize, that there is something there, right? It's not nothing. It may not rise to the level of like criminal, but it certainly may have been considered like unethical, unprofessional, in bad taste, what was being discussed.
That makes a lot more sense in terms of because I just thought, because I didn't know the subject matter. Initially, I thought they emailed him, what? But people corresponded with the Unabomber.
It's the substance of it. So, allegedly, my understanding is that Summers leveraged his position as a professor, as like a PhD advisor, to try and get one of his students to sleep with him. Allegedly, that's my understanding of what the discussion's about. And Epstein's egging him on and going out, attaboy, like, good job. But it's one of those things where it's not great, right?
Not great. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and another part of it that I thought was that might not have been all that he did. I don't want to accuse any individual, but if somebody knew, oh, I did this, and it's probably going to come out, maybe wrapping up one's public affairs before it does come out would be a good idea. So I considered that as a possibility as well. But yeah, I think all of this is more about what we don't see than what we do see. But at the very least, it's good that we've found, as a country, something to agree on. That even if we can't get a total release, it's like partial release. Yes, please. Nice try. Release the Epstein files, said everybody.
One other issue with Larry Summers is that apparently he was corresponding with Epstein like a day before he went to jail for the second time. And so it was just the timing of it was just like, why was he still interacting with him and corresponding with this publicly hated figure right up until he went to prison? What was going on there? That's the whole thing. Is as these emails and these files come out, it's going to show that there were a lot of people talking to Epstein or corresponding with him or interacting with him like way after the fact. And so even if they didn't do anything necessarily wrong, it's just the fact that they brushed off the things that he was alleged to have done and still interact with him in a friendly manner, if that makes sense. He didn't become a pariah. They essentially were giving him the equivalent of like an olive branch, or they were essentially being cordial with him. The question becomes then, how much did they know and to what extent did they disagree with or publicly denounce? There you go. What Epstein was doing, while at the same time talking to him in such a friendly and candid manner behind the scenes. Part of this is just the facade, right? Part of it is just the sort of edifice of you have like polite society and rich society and powerful society having this like public denunciation, this outcry, oh, that's terrible, oh, that's so wrong. But then behind the scenes, they're like hitting him up for money and they're talking to him about their relationships and they're asking him for advice and like all these sorts of things where it's okay, did you really disagree or denounce the things, or was it all for show? And that's where you get public scrutiny in the court of public opinion. Because once these things come to light, it's okay, what do these people really think behind closed doors, behind the scenes? And that's a whole different thing. It's not necessarily like criminal charges. It may not rise to that level, but it certainly is like a reputation thing of understanding better how people maybe really feel. And that, I think, is part of the whole saga and this ongoing debate, is that so much of this has been kept hidden, right? Is that it's like the shadowy cabal of rich people who are asking him for lots and lots of money. And that, I think, in some ways is not the bigger story, but it is certainly a part of the story that hasn't been prosecuted as much as probably it should have been, is all the money stuff. Because one of the things the Democrats mentioned was that there was just like a huge amount of money going back and forth between Epstein and other parties into the 2000s and the 2010s, this century, this millennium, this century. He was rich and he did stuff that rich people do that needs to be investigated further than just the sex trafficking, right? Like there were other things going on, and it would be good to understand what that element of it was. Like, why was he provided so much cover? Why was he given such great deals? Who was benefiting from his largesse and the fact that his money wasn't being spent paying compensate? I'm trying to think of the term.
Compensatory damages.
There you go, damages or something like that. What was going on there with the money, right? Because money is used for things, right? Like investments and properties and all that stuff. And the question becomes what was going on with the money right up until the time he was in prison? Because they never really got to the part of, I guess, after the fact, the estate paid out money. But in the time before that, what was going on, right? What was happening and who was getting. Anyways, that's a whole different thing. But that, in some ways, that is the story that hasn't been talked about as much, but certainly deserves being talked about because he was so wealthy. And the question becomes, where was his wealth coming from?
Yeah, that's the big question.
He was already a pariah after the conviction in the 2000s. He did go to prison. He did go to jail. He did serve prison time. Like, that did happen. Even though the agreement he got was a sweetheart deal, like it didn't charge any co-conspirators. And there's a bunch of other stuff in there that was like, what is going on here? But he still did become like felon-ish, right? Like felon adjacent. I don't know what the term would be to describe. Like it wasn't hidden the fact that
He became a sex offender in '08, right? I think that's right. So yeah, there we go. Hey, Mondays with Mike, rule number 1, don't get relationship advice from a convicted sex offender.
was just looking the other way anyways. After that fact, after it was publicly known that he had done that and was convicted of doing that, right? There's got to be, it's always follow the money. Like the financial stuff, right? There's got to be like a huge money trail of just like money going in, money going out. Where's it going? Who was it going to? What was the context of those interactions? And why was it never fully investigated? That's the story that I think in some ways the release of the Epstein files will better show is that web of connections.
Hopefully.
But again, we'll see, right? Because there are loopholes in there to obscure what's in those files. And we'll see if we're actually going to see any of the files in 30 days.
Yeah, and a BBC article now says that he's going to stop teaching. So not just public commitments, but also he's going to stop teaching. I don't know whether that's a permanent thing or while the investigation by Harvard continues. There you go. Lie down with dogs, get up with fleas.
Watch how people react when these things come to light. And if they decide to back away from all their public commitments, that's not someone fighting to say, no, that didn't happen, unequivocally denying things. And that's just the way it goes.
Initially, I didn't know you'd been friends with him before, and I thought, oh, what is it, a crime to, like, email somebody convicted of a crime now? But if it was for that kind of, and if they had been friends beforehand, there's the linchpin, yeah.
Journalists email people convicted of crimes all the time. They talk
That's
with
what
them.
I'm thinking,
That's
yeah.
their job. Therapists. There's plenty of people who, like, talk with people convicted of crimes. It's still people. They're still in prison. Like, you can send a letter to someone, and if they respond, that's their choice. It's the fact that the correspondence was over such an amount of time, and also when the last emails were, right, in this sort of ongoing saga, and then also the substance of those emails. Those are the things I think that are what's being discussed. And remember that those emails that were released aren't necessarily even in the Epstein files, right? Because they were from the estate, which is different than the investigation materials that were found. And so it's not even clear if any of those emails are even part of the Epstein files. They're a completely different strain of information. But yeah, it was strange that the Democrats released, I think it was 3 emails from the committee. And so the Republicans came back and were like, okay, we're going to release 20,000 emails. Okay. The question is that all the emails, the 20,000 emails that were released, or are there more? Who knows, right? What does the committee actually have? But we'll find out, right? There's, Like, the thing with this saga is that it's not just the files that the government has, but also the oversight committee is ongoing in their own investigation, and they're getting different files and different information separate from entirely the the thing related to the bill that was just passed. This story isn't going away, right? It's the story that just never ends. The people are clamoring for the information. There is real public pressure on the part of constituents for almost all of it. Like you saw it with the vote, right? Almost unanimous in the House. I think it was unanimous in the Senate because for unanimous consent, any senator can object and then they have to do a recorded vote. And so if it was unanimous consent, that means that no senator objected, right? So that they just passed the bill as is. So there was exactly one person in the entire legislative branch of
Yeah.
the U.S. Congress that voted against the release of these files.
And Trump used to disagree, but change of heart.
Like, I think he sees the way, you're right, he sees the ways the winds are going, the political winds are shifting. And so now the strategy is not don't release the files. The strategy is instead figure out every possible loophole to not release the files within the bill that was passed. That's what we're going to see now. At least that's what I suspect. I don't think they're going to just release all the files 100%. I do think there's going to be some squirrely objections put forward, for sure.
Cool. Glad they're out. Mondays with Mike.